I feel like this is a consistency for the channel. Do a few non-horror games, then jump right back into that rabbit hole, but fuck it, this is my channel. If I want to do a horror game outside of October because you don't need a reason or a month to cover one, so be it. And hey, it's a game I've been looking forward to, especially since I gave 7 a glowing recommendation. While it wasn't mentioned in the opening card, I strongly advise that you watch Let's Talk About Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, as many of my thoughts here are going to be springboarded off of what I said there. It makes sense seeing as Village is the sequel to that game and uses the same gameplay as the previous entry. To begin with a precise date, August 8th, 2016 was when development started for what would be Resident Evil Village. If you're wondering, at that point in time, 7 had yet to be released. In fact, Biohazard wouldn't release until 6 months after, on January 24th, 2017. Capcom had approached Muramasa Saito, scenario director of Biohazard, and basically told him that he had to start coming up with ideas for the follow-up to 7. At the time, we had no idea how users would react towards the new horror experience and characters of 7 yet, explained Saito in an article for IGN. The team for Biohazard wouldn't know that their game would rejuvenate the franchise as a whole until half a year later, deep in the development for this new game, so to serve as a foundation, Saito and producer Tsuyoshi Kanda looked back to the past, towards 2005. That year was when, I would argue, the most important entry in the series was released. Resident Evil 4. I feel as if I should address my editor's note that I made during the Raccoon City video, as it is probably one of my hottest takes. I will never downplay the importance of Resident Evil 4. It's the reason why third-person shooters are the way they are now. Sure, there were games like Winback, American McGee's Alice, and Max Payne, and I love the latter two, but there is a clear difference between those 3 games and Resi 4 of how their mechanics worked. Resident Evil 4 is on my list of the most important games ever released, next to Silent Hill 2 and Doom. But, and this is a big but, for the life of me, I can't enjoy Resident Evil 4 as a whole package. My biggest complaints with it are length and pacing. I can point to the best moments in that game, such as the starting point in the village, the standoff against the Horde of Luis, any moment with Salazar, and the battle with Krauser, but I don't recall what happens in the down moments of that game. To me, Resident Evil 4 has the same issue that Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth does, where the standout moments are memorable, but the events that happen in between are so forgettable. For every one set piece, there's about 2 sections of dicking around in corridors. And not like in the usual Resident Evil way, where you are stuck in one location and become intimate with it, a la the mansion in 1 or police department in 2, which I think adds to the overall length and pacing issues. Come the end of the castle, I want 4 to end. Again, I'm not going to say that my opinion is correct or objective, because that would make me look like a total twat, and the point of these videos isn't for me to come across as such. I'm not an authority on video games, I'm a guy with an opinion. And if you want to disagree with that opinion, go right ahead, that is totally encouraged. With my slightly long and controversial explanation out of the way, during early development, the planning stage for Village, the team latched onto many ideas introduced in 4 to help serve as a guiding post, Saito drafting up the idea of the village as a homage to the beginning area in Resident Evil 4. In an interview with Game Informer, issue number 335, Saito explains that when we began developing Resident Evil 7, the initial concept was honoring and respecting the very first Resident Evil and using that as a basis to build a brand new sense of survival horror. Resident Evil Village is going in that same direction, but this time we are respecting and honoring what Resident Evil 4 did to the industry and the franchise as a whole. Kanda would also go on to say in the IGN article that if Resident Evil 7 was like a reboot that inherited the DNA of the original Resident Evil, then you could say that this time we're doing the same for Resident Evil 4. We've designed the game and its structure with Resident Evil 4's essence in mind, so I think that you'll be able to find a lot of elements that remind you of that game. In a bit of irony, as I think this would be the best time for me to bring this up, seeing as the Resident Evil franchise is going through a reimagine resurgence with Reimagine 2 and 3, I prefer that term as opposed to remake for 2 and 3, as both do their own things, unlike Remake 1, which is a hard remake. The fate of the reimagine/make for 4 is up in the air due to arguments over its direction. Per Video Games Chronicle, new studio M2 has seen its role significantly reduced on the unannounced project, with mainline Resident Evil studio Capcom Division 1 brought in to lead a new direction. This isn't even bringing up COVID's impact, which affected Village, or the ransomware attack that leaked a number of games Capcom was allegedly working on. Some were confirmed, Village and Reimagine 4, others yet to be. Dragon's Dogma 2 and Monster Hunter 6. One last tangent, it's funny how in the numbered games, the number 3 has importance. Resident Evil saw a change come its 4th, focusing on action, and 7th, switching the perspective to the first person entry, a separation of 3 whether from 1 to 4 or 4 to 7. The Game Informer article makes note of this as well, Ben Rees writing that the studio, Capcom, has noticed a trend in its development of the series. Around every third mainline entry, Resident Evil goes through a dramatic rebirth. That makes me wonder what Resident Evil 10 is going to be like if Capcom keeps this trend up. Who knows, we might get a mainline RPG out of the series, seeing as Gaiden exists. Village would be going for a cross between Biohazard's uncompromising horror and 4's fast-paced action, two elements that seem at odds with each other. Keyword seems, as the reason why Resident Evil 5 and 6 failed as horror games was because they dropped one of the most integral parts of Resident Evil's gameplay: resource management. I know this was a core element in the development of 7 Biohazard, but I want to explain how Resident Evil does horror as it is intrinsically tied to this mechanic. For a comparison, Silent Hill does have the aspect of resource management, however the main form of horror in that franchise comes from the fact that Konami is letting it sit and rot until the end of time. Wait a second. Rewind. For comparison, Silent Hill does have the aspect of resource management. However, the main forms of horror in the franchise lies in how defenseless the player character is, as most Silent Hill protagonists are regular people put into abnormal situations, and the psychological angle. Fear of blood leading to fear of flesh, that kind of stuff. The monsters in Silent Hill are scary on 2 fronts. You have to deal with them whether by killing or avoiding, and what they represent. There's nothing like being in a cramped, skin-lined room representing a uterus fighting the personification of incestual rape. Silent Hill definitely leans more towards avoiding enemies, however, as melee weapons are the norm in that series, which is where Resident Evil differs. On the flip side, Resident Evil protagonists are mostly trained officers, soldiers, or people with knowledge in firearms and self-defense. The horror in Resident Evil doesn't come from, oh, I'm going to have to fight a malignant mound of malicious meat even though I don't want to. It's, I have the capability of killing this malignant mound of malicious meat, but what if another one shows up? It's the fear of poor decision making, at least that's what I'm going to call it, because the horror comes from having to make snapshot decisions. Let me use Reimagine 2 as the example. There's a zombie blocking a hallway that you need to go down. You don't know what is past the zombie, but you have the ammo to take it out. Choosing to do so, you are met with a licker in the room down the hallway that you now can't kill. A poor decision has led to a disastrous outcome. Going back to square one, you choose to avoid the zombie, not wanting to waste ammo, but it manages to grab you and put you into caution, making the fight with the licker a bit more difficult as you are wounded. The zombie is also still in the hallway, thus making a return trip to that location at a later time more difficult. Or it might even follow you into the room with the licker, thus turning a one-on-one into a handicap match. Once again, a lackluster choice has led to a horrible situation. That mindset, knowing whether or not you made the right judgment call in the heat of the moment, is the core of Resident Evil's horror. Of course, that isn't the only type of scare you'll get in the franchise. Speaking of scares, I'm pretty sure enough of you have seen a variant of the article, Resident Evil Village is less scary for me to comment on it. While that headline is attention-grabbing, it's a misnomer. Jumping back to the Game Informer article, Saito tells the magazine that if you make the player encounter a scary monster that in itself is scary, I feel that's not enough. You have to tap into their imagination and work with their anticipation and build towards that scary moment. Sometimes you actually betray that anticipation. I think that's a key element to horror. You want to hit that balance between progressing further, but also being scared to progress further. We call it the tension curve, figuring out how to make things tense without letting players grow numb to that tension. This is entirely a reaction to Resident Evil 7, which has been mentioned by fans to be the scariest entry, and by using the emotional response of one of my friends, I can agree to Saito's statement. It's funny he mentions this though, seeing as... Well, I'll get to that moment, as it's the one that everyone is talking about. This also has its ties to the game's marketing in Japan, which I will cover when I get to the game's release, as it is by far one of the coolest things ever done. Having settled on a location for the game, art director Tomonori Takano got down to designing a cast of characters for what would later be dubbed the theme park of horror. Once again drawing inspiration from Resident Evil 4, in this case lovable aristocrat Ramon Salazar, Takano's process went a little like this. We reused the character model of Mia Mia from Resident Evil 7 and made her wear a dress and hat. I thought that this would be enough to give her a ghost-like quality, but we couldn't make her feel scary. Then, we decided to make the character model much larger. In short, Takano had created the towering vampiress known as Lady Dimitrescu. I'm pretty sure everyone here is well acquainted with her, seeing as she's been all over the marketing, and your timelines, and R34. Let's just say Ethan's hands weren't the only ones under duress this time. With my one horny joke out of the way, notice I used the word vampiress as that was the other side of Takano's inspiration. Instead of drawing from hillbilly horror, as was the case for 7 Biohazard, Takano drew from more classical inspirations, basing Dimitrescu on figures like famed 16th century Hungarian noblewoman and serial killer Elizabeth Bathory, a real-life vampire, the Japanese urban legend Hashaku-sama, 8 feet tall as she is colloquially known, and Angelica Houston's Morticia Addams. Takano didn't want her to be too stereotypical though, using fashion styles from the 20s to the 60s to make her stand out against other vampires. This would also be the case for other characters that would inhabit the village, as Carl Heisenberg would draw inspirations from the werewolf mythos, Moreau from Mermen, Donna and Angie from Ghosts, and Mother Miranda, the head of the 4 houses and main villain, from Crows. Village would be home to at least 5 distinct flavors of horror, making it, as I said earlier, a theme park of horror. That's because each member would have their own distinct area in the village, and I'm referring and have been referring to it as such with a capital V, as the location is very much a character to itself, like the mansion from 1 or police department from 2/3, with set pieces directly tied to each member of the houses, as in the halls of Castle Dimitrescu, the player would be chased by the lady herself and her daughters, which there are 3 of. Once again, this draws a parallel to Resident Evil 4, as you had the Ganado village and outskirts overseen by Mendez, Salazar's castle of Salazar, and the island lab home to Sadler, but unlike 4, Village has a main hub, it being the village, connecting the different locations together. In an IGN article, Saito explains that this is indeed one of Village's newest evolutions. We've prepared a more open environment, and basically we just tell the player to go and have fun with it, which is something Resident Evil hasn't done before. While the main story still advances in what we think is the best order to experience it, it is totally possible to ignore the objectives and just get lost in the game's world. There are many houses you can completely ignore, but as we feel is important to reward the player's eagerness to explore, there will always be something interesting to discover. We really put a lot of effort into making Village's exploration worthwhile. With the success of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, Saito knew that the direct sequel would be a continuation of Ethan Winters' story. Conda even mentioning that, as the original creator of Ethan, Saito really wanted to bring this character's story to completion, in an IGN article. Time had passed for the unsuspecting systems engineer. 4 years, in fact. While the scars from Louisiana still remain, Ethan and Mia have started to rebuild their lives, having a child by the name of Rosemary. That's when Chris Redfield makes his reappearance in their lives to not only kill Mia, but kidnap Rose, making family once again the theme for the game. This time, though, it'd be Ethan protecting his. And this goes without mentioning, Village uses the RE engine, which is probably made of Shoggoth spunk and orphan organs because the shit it does is beyond any realm of understanding.
What the hell is this thing made out of?
Nothing.
Come on.
All right, fine. I might have used a few unorthodox parts.
Just tell me one.
An orphan.
Resident Evil Village saw a worldwide release on May 7th, 2021 to Windows, PlayStation 4 and 5, Xbone and Series X, and surprisingly Stadia, the modern-day Ouya. While the marketing in the West for Village saw heavy usage of Dimitrescu, hiding most of the game, which is a positive in this instance as it left many of the surprises in the dark, marketing in Japan saw the creation of the RE Village Puppet Show, its main tagline said by the 4 heads of the houses being, "We're not scary." It's so wonderfully adorable. This history does take a bit of a sad note at the end, however, as the voice actress for Cassandra, Jeanette Ma, tragically passed away on January 24th, 2021 due to colon cancer. The version I played was the Steam release, and I played on New Game Plus as there are some extra goodies in the game that are only unlocked in that mode. Before we start proper, we have a recap of sorts to go through. Not one from my perspective, though I've already told you to watch my Biohazard video, nor from Ethan's as he does provide a mini recap in the extras menu. No, this one is from Zoe Baker as 4 years have passed since the Dolby incident. In that time from there, 2017, to now around present day 2021, Zoe has researched into several topics, from the public perception to the events of Dulvey to how the BSAA handled the situation, and finally where Ethan and Mia are located. To start off, the BSAA fed a cover story to the public about what happened in Dulvey, saying that everyone involved died of a noxious hydrogen sulfide gas leak. You know, because there are volcanoes in Louisiana. The reaction to this cover-up was skeptical due to satellite images capturing the monstrous Evelyn. This is also the Resident Evil universe, a place where an ocean city was decimated by a space laser because it was overrun by BOWs, and a huge city in China was subject to the gaseous form of the C virus alongside being buffeted by the Juavo. Saying this though, apparently regular people in the universe believed Raccoon City was a crazy conspiracy and that nothing went down in that doomed town. I mean, the destruction of Raccoon City was an inside job by presidential aide and head of the family Derek Simmons, who could have easily lied to the public and totally did so. While it appears to be odd that the BSAA gave a cover story in this ridiculous world, it's because ultimately they were the cause for what happened in Dulvey. The organization pinpointed the connections in Europe and sent a squad to attempt to neutralize them and impede their research into E-series BOWs. Side tangent that will become important later, the BSAA no longer refers to the mold as the E-series, instead calling it Mutamycete. Mutamycete, as per the BSAA's investigations into it, infecting a person technically kills them as it forms its own nervous system and acts like a parasite to the host body. This explains the incredible endurance those have when under the Mutamycete's influence and could possibly explain why a cure wouldn't work. Jack still came back after being injected with one, and Mia still saw Evelyn as the little girl during the boat. That would also mean Ethan, unfortunately, has been infected with the mold, as he was whisked away by Evelyn during the later half of the Dulvey event and started seeing her under the glamour when Mia rescued him. Anyway, failing spectacularly, the BSAA were powerless to stop the connections from sending Evelyn and Mia to America, though in hindsight the connections couldn't have guessed that Evelyn would throw a monkey wrench into their own plans. That's when Blue Umbrella stepped in and the BSAA sent Chris as an advisor. Part of the cover-up, anyone who survived the incident was pronounced legally dead and placed into the witness protection program. While Zoe was mostly cooped up in a BSAA hospital where she started her investigation, the Winterses were going through a much worse fate. Interrogations. Mia was a member of the Connections, putting her on the group's shit list. The only thing that got the Winterses out of bad times was that Mia opted to spill the beans on the Connections, earning the two a prolonged stay in Europe under the watchful eye of the BSAA. Though not allowed to go anywhere out of the country, Ethan and Mia started to rebuild, as when one door closes, another opens. The husband and wife had a child, a little girl by the name of Rose. Zoe learned about this from a letter she received from Mia, but that wasn't the only thing she found out. Settled next to Mia's letter was one from the BSAA addressed to Chris Redfield. Openly critical of the BSAA's actions regarding Dulvey, Chris took command of an elite unit called the Hound Wolf Squad without permission, accessed a bunch of classified files, and separated himself from the organization, vowing to uphold integrity in the fight against bioterrorism. Words on the back of the letter, undoubtedly written by Chris, who unquestionably placed this letter for Zoe to find, warning that it isn't over. With that freely floating in your mind, our tale begins with a tale, a fairy tale by the name of Village of Shadows. Reading aloud is Mia, who details how when a young girl and her mother went to the forest to pick berries, the little girl ran away deep into the thicket.
Yet determined to find the berries, the rascal broke free from Mother's grasp and vanished into the trees. Mother's worried cries faded fast as the girl ran on, over vine and under branch, and into the forest deep. Feeling strange eyes upon her, the girl recalled Mother's scary bedtime tales, and her throat became bone dry. Then the Bat Lord appeared.
Running into a Bat Lord, a Dark Weaver, a Fish King, and an Iron Steed, the little girl took an item from each of them. While the first three were okay with this, the Iron Steed wasn't, calling all the denizens together to summon a witch.
And summon the other monsters. Terror filled the girl's heart as the wild wind rose around the beasts. Suddenly, a witch appeared, dark, yet regal.
Leaving the storybook animation and embracing the RE engine, we see that Mia, still reading about how the witch trapped the little girl in a mirror for never reciprocating the gifts she received, is telling this story to Rose all the while Ethan listens. While the ending of the story is left a mystery as Rose dozes off before Mia can finish, Ethan makes his opinion known. Village of Shadows is too much for Rose's developing psyche. Back in my day, I had to deal with King Ramses II. Village of Shadows is a nice walk in the park compared to that balding, dusty-ass troll doll-looking motherfucker. Do you guys hear that? Hang on.
Return the slab, or suffer my curse. This night you will be visited by 3 plagues, each worse than the last. Return the slab.
Buddy, my life condition is a plague upon itself, and I think you have the wrong address. Weird neighbors you get when you inhabit an abandoned movie theater. Better him than people daring each other to explore in here, as I usually have to eat them. Where was I? Ethan and Mia get into a slight back and forth as it's made apparent that Dolby took a toll on him, but before the two can get more heated, Mia tells Ethan to take Rose to bed. As he's doing that, Ethan explores a bit of his new home, showcasing to the audience how much has changed for the Winterses. In the time between games, Ethan has picked up firearms training, and he even owns a book authored by Joseph Kendo, brother to the late Robert Kendo. Good to know that at least one of them is still alive, otherwise how would people get their samurai edges? Having cool gun skills and a seemingly normal baby didn't do wonders for this marriage though, as the Winters' relationship is on the decline. Louisiana as a topic is a festering boil about to burst. Returning back to the kitchen to settle in with Mia for the night over local cuisine and wine, Ethan expresses his worries over the previous events that led him to living in Europe.
It's just finding you in Louisiana, the pregnancy, Chris moving us here, military training, it all happened so fast, you know?
Mia begins to assuage Ethan, though it seems more like she's brushing off what took place at the Baker estate, but a stray bullet cuts her off.
You think we can just forget about what happened in Louisiana?
It happened so long ago. I don't understand why you are so...
For a brief moment, we and Ethan witness Mia flashing a glare of utmost annoyance and indignation before all the lights in the house turn off and Mia's peppered by more rounds. Behind the attack is Chris Redfield and his hound wolves, leaving Ethan perplexed and vehement.
What? Why?
Go move!
Moving Ethan and Rose into transport vehicles, the wolves and Chris kidnap 2 of the 3 Winterses. Though he does attempt to struggle, Ethan is knocked out.
Get your hands off her! Ethan, no.
Rose.
Get him out.
Floating in and out of consciousness, Ethan has a dream reminding him of how important his daughter and wife are, even if the two's relationship became sour.
Hey, Doc.
Hello, Mr. Winters. I've got your daughter's results back, and I'd like you to come in to talk about them. How about next Thursday, 4 o'clock?
No problem. We'll be there. That was the doc. She'll see us next week. Hey now, think positively, all right? We talked about this.
I know. We hardly talk about anything else. I keep telling you, it's not Rose that I'm worried about.
Well then what are you worried about? Look, she's gonna be fine. I just know it. What else matters?
We matter, Ethan! You matter! You just
Mia, what are you talking about? Is there something you're not telling me? Come on, talk to me. Damn it. I have to take this.
Something is up with Ethan, but before we can learn what that is, a ringing phone wakes up our sleeping beauty. Something happened while Ethan was drifting off, and whatever it was, it derailed the Wolves' transport detail. Checking his surroundings, Ethan finds a mission report by the squad listing 2 objectives: neutralize the target and secure Rosemary and Ethan. That exact wording on the first parameter is a bit odd. Having only one direction to head towards, and with the dead of winter sapping our hero's vitality, Ethan trudges down a lonely path adorned with dead crows. The man with no face isn't the only one on the trail, as some truly bizarre figures stalk Ethan as he travels the road. Finding a shack at the end of the footpath, Ethan enters to find no one home. The hut is lived in, the residents owning various household items, but what catches Ethan's attention is a downed picture frame. The picture inside, a truly macabre figure, one that seems like the head of a dark religion. Just as Ethan is finished exploring the ramshackle's basement, all hell breaks loose upstairs, and while Ethan doesn't find the source of the destruction, he does spot a rather large hole leading outside the cabin. Night has turned to day as Ethan overlooks a secluded village, home to a Gothic nightmare of a castle, a rundown factory, a large reservoir, a decaying stronghold, and an obscured wooded pathway, its destination unknown. Not having many choices, Ethan steps foot into the village, which, while remote, did have signs of life. Too bad a majority of the farm animals have been decapitated, and some of the items from Ethan's home have been strewn about. Unexpectedly, because of the state of the village, Ethan does find another soul, but almost gets his head blown off. Due to Farmer Ted's, most of these villagers have names, but they're all the same. Red Shirt. Premature discharge, whatever was stalking Ethan through the trail has become alert to his and Ted's presence. Handing Ethan a gun, though Ethan already has several because I'm playing on New Game Plus, Ted and the man with no face brace for the worst. That being an attack from strange wolf-like figures. As Ted is dragged upwards to his doom, Ethan is pulled down to meet more villagers. All of them are dead.
You have a gun? What? Please tell me you have a gun. No, why would I? Take it! Take it! Tell me it's out there. Hey, are you listening? Hey! What the? Dead body? Wait, there's more.
Going from bad to worse, one of the creatures that pulled Ethan down under the floorboards redoubles its attack, biting into Ethan's left hand like it was a burger. Must be nice to have some exotic food from time to time.
What the hell is wrong with this place? What the fuck was that? No.
Despite no longer having a ring or pinky finger, Ethan puts down the lichen. Finding his old friend the Bolt Cutters, Ethan makes his way into another house, this one with a radio. The channel it has been tuned to is playing that oldie song we all know, Static. Monsters are nearby, so at least it's doing its job. In saying this, Ethan doesn't pick it up, as when he gets close to it, the radio cuts out and more Lycans attack. Surviving this second barrage, a Lycan Ethan killed disintegrating to dust much like those who've been infected by the Mutamycete, the radio turns back on, a voice on the other side telling him to go towards Louisa's home for sanctuary. Trying to do that, Ethan faces a third ambush reminiscent of Leon's introduction to Spain, right down to the attack being called off by the ringing of a bell. As the Lycans and the leader of the pack, the large hammer-wielding Urias, most of these enemy names are in Romanian, are no longer breathing down his throat, Ethan patches up his left hand as best he can before interacting with an old witch. The old crone does warn Ethan that the village has fallen into darkness ever since a figure by the name of Mother Miranda brought Rose to this place, and the bell heralds the appearance of danger.
What the hell? Hey, can you hear me?
It's you, the child's father.
Child? Hey, wait, do you mean Rose? Is she here?
Rose! Rose, yes. She is in great danger. Since Mother Miranda brought her to the village, we have fallen into darkness.
What are you talking about? The monsters?
The castle bell heralds danger. They're coming!
No. Wait. Where's Rose? Who's Mother Miranda?
The bell tolls for us all. They're coming again!
Going off of that, Ethan investigates a bit of the village, finding one piece to a Resident Evil lock in the form of the Maiden Stonecrest in the local church, embellished with the visage of Mother Miranda as with most of the village, and some villagers, an injured man and his daughter. Leading them to the safety of Louisa's house, Ethan and the two are brought inside, though Ethan does get looked down upon by Louisa's caretaker, Ilian. Inside the makeshift haven, Ethan comes face to face with the culture of the village. Mother Miranda is the religious figure the villagers worship, but she has supposedly betrayed them. Making damn well on that promise that all the villagers are red shirts, the father transforms into a Lycan, killing everyone in Louisa's house and forcing Ethan and the daughter to another part of it.
Give me the hag. Bitch is crazy as a bag of rats.
There is wisdom in her devotion, though. And I hope it protected her as it shall protect us.
What are you doing?
Leonardo, what's wrong? Are you okay?
Father!
Elena, no, stay back!
No, let me go!
We have to go!
Let him go!
Elena?
I said no!
Oh my God. I'm so sorry, Father.
Hey, that wasn't your father anymore. You did the right thing. Elena, no! There's nothing you can do!
Papa!
This entire place is collapsing! You couldn't save him. He was already gone.
Leave me alone.
No, we're getting out of here. Together.
Thinking fast before the fire the father created by knocking over a lamp consumes the house, Ethan finds a key to a truck and a screwdriver, allowing him to create an escape for himself and the daughter. Well, only himself, as the daughter, racked with emotion by seeing her father act lucid fighting whatever affliction affecting him, falls into the flames. Alone again, Ethan collects the Demon Stone crest before spotting who can only be Mother Miranda pulping Ilian into chunky salsa.
Who's there? Stop! Mother Miranda! Hey!
Who was... What was that?
Perturbed but still determined to rescue Rose, Ethan unlocks the entrance to Castle Dimitrescu. Yet before you can see why the villagers were afraid of this place of blood and death, a Bloodborne cosplayer armed with the boom hammer, someone's a fan of the old hunters, strikes up a chat with Ethan. Did I say Bloodborne cosplayer? I meant Magneto, as this Devil May Cry villain binds Ethan in place with metal like Joseph and Avdol fighting Mariah.
You're not local. Even better. Mother Miranda is gonna love you.
Incapacitated for the second time in a row this journey, 4th overall between 7 and Village, Ethan is brought before I'll call the Council of 5. Discussing on what should happen to Ethan is Mother Miranda, the sister of Ultimecia, Alcina Dimitrescu, everyone's wet dream, Carl Heisenberg, no, he doesn't make meth, Donna and Angie Benveniento, stars of the novel The Girl in the Dollhouse, and Salvatore Moreau, who's a freaky fish person. They're deciding who should kill Ethan, with Miranda choosing Heisenberg.
Cut off in the castle, blah, blah, blah.
I've heard all your arguments. Some of you were less persuasive than others, but I've made my decision. Heisenberg, the man's fate is in your hands.
Dimitrescu is not pleased with this, citing the man's immaturity and lack of loyalty to Miranda, but Heisenberg steps up to her. Well, as much as he can, with Dimitrescu towering over him. Both squabble over the point, informing us that even though the two are on the same side, they're dysfunctional with a capital D. Miranda, flexing her outdoor voice, warns the two to knock it off and remember where they came from. Guess Ethan is dealing with the McMahons, just in video game form. Free to kill Ethan, Heisenberg summons a horde of Lycans before giving Ethan a 10-second head start that our man squanders.
And now let the games begin!
Let's see what you're doing. Ethan Winters.
Get ready.
No!
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Showtime!
Running down into the underground passages, Ethan narrowly avoids Lycans and death traps, removing the cuffs on his hands and earning himself entry to the castle. Before entering it, though, Ethan is stopped by a rotund man who has been waiting for him and even calls Ethan by his full name. This freaks him out, but the Duke calms Ethan's nerves by informing our hero that he is but a simple merchant. Ethan takes the Duke for his word, buying a few items he thinks he will need for the soon-to-be hassle in the castle. I'm wording it as such because as soon as Ethan steps inside, the front gate shuts. Someone is expecting a visitor, or four someones, as Ethan gets dragged by Dimitrescu's daughters, Bella, Cassandra, and Daniela, to the lady of the castle herself.
Man blood.
Mother, I bring you fresh prey.
You are so kind to me, daughters. Now, let's take a look at him. Wow,
Well, Ethan Winters, you escaped my little brother's idiot games, did you? Let's see how special you are.
All four are vampires, though the daughters are seemingly made up of bugs as well, as when Ethan gets captured, Dimitrescu partakes in some of his blood, noting that it tastes stale. While the daughters are more than willing to engorge themselves right now, there is an order to proceedings as Dimitrescu has to advise Miranda on where Ethan is.
Starting to go a little stale.
Then let's devour his man-flesh quickly, Mother. I am the one who captured him.
Now, daughters. First, I must inform Mother Miranda. But later, well, there will be enough for everyone. Put him up.
Hey, wait.
Placing him onto hooks, the four leave Ethan be. Not a fan of hanging around or Hellraiser, Ethan rips himself free of the rather lackadaisical holding cell, finding healing drink to fix his cut-apart hands and beginning a lengthy excursion into the castle to find Rose. Without an inkling on where to start first, Ethan ventures back to the foyer, finding four statues rising up out of the floor in a side room home to a labyrinth puzzle. The architect, Norstein, made four of these strange contraptions to house the remains of his four wives, and when he finished making the last of these elaborate ball puzzles, he took his own life, that has now been inhabited by Duke. Pointed towards the lady's private quarters, Ethan starts to head there, but a roadblock in the form of Bella forces him into one of the castle's many subterranean tunnels.
I haven't cut open a man in a while. Let me string you up. Slice. Is she taken alive, dead? Which would you prefer? I can't hold back any longer.
Though thrown off course, Ethan catches Dimitrescu carting off a bottle of Sanguis Virginis, the vintage that put the Dimitrescu name on the map in the wine world, and an item Ethan needs to progress to some part of the castle. Exploring some of the dungeons in the castle where who knows what kind of experiments went on, Ethan is beset by Moriaika, the failed result of whatever experiments Dimitrescu was conducting. Bella makes her return as well, cornering Ethan in the kitchen. Firing right into the mass of bugs does nothing, but accidentally hitting a window, Ethan learns that the daughters are weak to the cold. I'm not a fan of the cold either. Favoring a knife fight, Ethan kills Bella with his karambit.
You stupid man thing! Give up!
What? My body! It's breaking!
Oh, not like this! Impertinent man!
Locating the vintage and finding the courtyard key, Ethan enters the wing of the castle that has Dimitrescu's room, but finds it locked. He also overhears the lady herself distraught over the death of Bella. Funneled into another puzzle, Ethan solves it to enter the cellar, or as I like to call it, the blood room. It takes Ethan, in a roundabout manner, to the terrace where he listens in on Dimitrescu talking to Miranda over an old-timey phone.
Mother Miranda, I regret to inform you that Ethan Winters has escaped that fool Heisenberg. Because he is in my castle and has already proven too much for my daughters to handle. When I find him... No, Mother Miranda. Yes, of course, I understand the importance of the ceremony. I won't let you down. To hell with the ceremony! That man will pay for what he's done.
Expressing her anger over Miranda's decisions, Dimitrescu throws a vanity and storms out of her room, letting Ethan peruse around inside. On a love seat is Dimitrescu's personal diary, which elucidates us to the situation regarding our villains. Apparently they are all siblings, with Miranda being the mother. Not finding Rose, Ethan instead takes Dimitrescu's key, earning himself a chokeslam from the lady into another dungeon.
There you go. All this for a child who isn't even here.
What the hell do...
You ungrateful, selfish wretch! You come into my house! You lay your filthy man-hands on my daughters! And now you even try to steal my property! How dare you! Rest while you can! Because I will hunt you, and I will break you!
Go ahead, do your worst.
Ethan's first direct encounter with Dimitrescu sees his right arm sliced off, though through perseverance and some help from Healing Drink, Ethan escapes the Countess's clutches for the time being, collecting one of the 4 masks needed to unlock a potential escape route out of the castle. The rest of Ethan's adventure in the castle sees him acquiring the masks, killing the other 2 daughters, and facing off with Dimitrescu's mutated dragon. Dracul does mean the dragon, Dracula being son of the dragon, seeing as our fair ladies inspired by vampires, form after he stabs her with the poisoned dagger of Death's Flowers. While he started off with nothing when he entered the castle, Ethan is at least leaving it with a mysterious flask bearing the symbol of House Dimitrescu. Traversing a stone passage back to the village, Ethan runs into the old crone again. Giving out to her, Ethan is met with cryptic hoo-ha. How can a man be almost dead? Paying it no mind, Ethan demands to know where Rose is, the witch telling him that Rose will be sacrificed.
I almost died up at that castle. Tell me, what is going on around here?
How can a man be almost dead? That's a question for the wise.
You know what I mean. And I still haven't found Rose. Where did Mother Miranda take her?
You're too late. Or maybe almost too late. The child will be sacrificed, life for life.
What kind of sick medieval shit is this? She's just a baby.
That is, unless Ethan deals with the 4 houses of this village. They even have a lovely mural in this cave depicting the... Oh no. Well, that's where he got the idea.
Wait a second. That looks familiar.
Picking up what the old woman put down, a black winged key, Ethan leaves the cave to see more recognizable imagery. Running down a second lonesome road, Ethan runs back into the Duke, who reveals some startling news. The flask Ethan has taken is one of Rose's body parts.
Why, you have your daughter right in your own hands.
What are you saying?
Take a closer look.
The girl can be revived, but before Duke can explain how, he directs Ethan to a house in the village so the dad can promote his 2-winged key to a 4-winged one. Ethan also slots the flask into a pillar, divulging a bit of what happened after the transport truck crashed. Now with his newly made 4-winged key, Ethan receives a history lesson from the Duke about the 4 houses and the other locations he must visit to get the other flasks.
The second lives deep in a valley of mist, the doll-maker, Donna Beneviento. None of her playmates have ever come back from that dank old estate. The third is Moreau, a being of twisted flesh that lives in the reservoir past the windmills. It is said that he is not the only monster that lives in those waters. The fourth and most dangerous is Heisenberg. He works in his factory on the village outskirts. And the project. Let's just say parts of the human imagination are better left alone.
Only having access to House Benviento at the moment, Ethan treks through the wooded area, mysteriously seeing Mia. Giving up the picture of his family to enter the house, Ethan is strung along towards the basement, Donna's workshop. Though the puppeteer is nowhere to be seen, Angie and the house's flask is. Bait, as I would say, because as soon as Ethan grabs the flask, all the lights in the basement flicker off, allowing Angie to take Ethan's whole entire inventory. Unarmed, Ethan is forced to complete a set of puzzles while listening to Mia's private thoughts and escape a ghastly fetus monster back topside so he can kill Angie.
Don't leave. I can't let you. You're still alive, huh? Before my friends murder you! Tick-tock! Your life's on the line. Wait!
Actually, by the time Ethan stepped onto the footpath leading to the house, the flowers growing there released a chemical compound that made him start hallucinating. Donna was not only interested in puppets and old film, but alkaloids. The Angie that Ethan killed with scissors was, for a fact, Donna. Free of the mental prison and with another flask and key piece in hand, Ethan tries to head over to the reservoir, but his scheduled mauling sees him torn up by a Varkalok before he reaches it. Tired of this village's bullshit, Ethan kills the werewolf and plunges into the reservoir, finding Moreau in the peak of despair, eating cheese and watching TV. Yoinking the flask from right under Moreau's nose, Ethan disregards the simpleton but is caught by his words, allowing Moreau to close off the reservoir.
Mother Miranda, if it's for you, I'd do anything.
I'll just be taking this.
Wait! What are you doing with Mother's special child?
She's not hers.
Oh, you have something to say?
What do you mean, Mother's special child?
Mother wants her baby back.
Don't screw with me!
Wait, please. If you take it, then the others will laugh at me. But if I do better than them...
What do I care?
Wait, just a little longer, please.
What's so funny?
You're stupid. You talk too much. It's all over. I plugged the way in.
What do you...
This is my territory. And I won't let you leave.
Shit.
Coerced into diving deeper, Ethan has a reunion with Chris. It goes about as well as you expect.
Get off of me! Stay the fuck down!
Ethan! I gotta say, I'm surprised you made it this far. It'd be a shame if something happened to you now.
Sure, Chris. Why not? You killed Mia. Now do me and finish the job.
Hey, Cap. I'm getting some serious motion readings out here. We should move on.
What kind of readings? What's moving?
Unknown, but my guess is we've been here too long, and Miranda knows it.
Hey, did you say Miranda? How are you involved?
Leave it alone, Ethan. You are out of your depth. What about the sample analysis?
It's definitely related to the mold.
You stay out of our business, Ethan.
Before Ethan can get answers from Chris, Needs an Heir, Redfield, a transformed Moreau barges his way into the conversation. As the only exit out of the reservoir is now underwater, Ethan maneuvers himself around the sunken town and Moreau to power up the sluice gate. Turning it on, Ethan has one last encounter with Moreau, defeating him and getting the last part of the winged key in Moreau's living space. Lying next to the key is a twitching parasite in a jar labeled Cadeau, which is one of two things that catches Ethan's attention as he's leaving the reservoir. The other is a broadcast by Heisenberg. Sensing that a deal can be made, Carl offers one to Ethan if he can get the last flask from the stronghold.
You're better off than I thought.
Who's that?
Oh, come on. We just met a while back, not that it really matters.
You're the last asshole in my way, aren't you?
You've got fight. I'll give you that, Ethan. But what's the plan when you have all 4 flasks?
What are you trying to get at?
I could lend you a hand.
Trying to get on my good side?
Now don't get cocky. I'd kill you if you weren't worth the trouble. There's a stronghold not too far outside the village. Go there and get my flask. Do that, and you pass. First, head back to the graveyard.
Self-centered prick.
Though it isn't an easy task, as the stronghold is home to the lichens, Ethan battles his way through to grab the last petal of the flower called Rose, experiencing another flashback, confirming that these are from Rose's perspective. On cue, Heisenberg congratulates Ethan for his success before telling him to place the flasks in the altar. Having already done so for 3 of the 4, when Ethan puts the last one in, it releases the giant's chalice. Taking the stone pillar, Ethan places it at the ceremony grounds, giving him access to the factory. True to his word, Heisenberg doesn't do any funny stuff to Ethan, and in fact, the Tinkerer explains to the father that this whole situation is a test for Ethan to see if he is a suitable candidate for Miranda's family.
Truth hurts, don't it? Let me guess. You're thinking, take me out like the others, and then he gets to go and save Rose, right?
I'm healing my daughter.
Look, you got this all wrong. Tell me what I'm talking about. Shut your fucking hole! Sorry about that. Take a seat. Listen, Ethan, you're being played.
What are you talking about? You think this is a game?
I said sit! Lady, supersized bitch. Ugly ass psycho doll. An embryonic freak. Don't you get it? It's a test. To see if you're strong enough to be a part of Miranda's family.
I don't want to be a part of Miranda's family.
Neither did I, but here we are. And I'm next in line, right? Kill me, move up the chain. Well, fuck that!
I don't give a damn about your personal issues. I just want to fix my daughter.
So do I. Do you have any idea how powerful that kid is? Even Miranda's scared of her. Last time, you freak, I swear to God!
Ethan doesn't care about Heisenberg's self-centered grudge, only wanting to save his daughter, though Heisenberg does try to get Ethan to use Rose against Miranda. For even suggesting on using his daughter as a weapon, Ethan delivers a well-deserved fuck you to Heisenberg. Noticing that he's getting nowhere, Heisenberg drops Ethan into his factory, a twisted workshop where a presumed victor is playing Frankenstein, constructing monsters for his war against Miranda. Struggling to reach above ground, Ethan faces off with the many mechanical monstrosities swarming the corridors, all the while Heisenberg taunts him. Making it to the hangar, Ethan finds an eye-opening journal entry from Heisenberg. The four lords are Miranda's experiments. She implanted a Cadeau, a parasitic being made of mutamycete, in each of them to see if they had enough affinity with the mutamycete, which comes from a thing called the megamycete. Through it, Miranda can turn herself into anyone. She doesn't view the four as family, despite outwardly claiming as such. The only one who knows about the Great Lie is Heisenberg, who wants his dignity back and is more than willing to use Rose against Miranda. The last lines of this journal mention that Ethan himself isn't entirely normal, which would be the case as Ethan did get molded by Evelyn during his entrapment on the boat. Arriving back at the factory's entrance, Ethan has a scuffle with Heisenberg, who tosses him like a wet paper towel back into the factory.
That bastard. Damn it again.
At rock bottom, Ethan happens upon Chris again, who tells the whole story to the man as Ethan has involved himself too much for Chris to push him away now. The Mia in the beginning wasn't Mia. It was Miranda. For how long she was living with Ethan is undeterminable, but she survived being turned into Swiss cheese and attacked the transport from within. This village is one giant testing ground for Miranda, with her life's work involving something to do with Rose. As Chris plants explosives in the factory to shut down Heisenberg's army, Ethan comes to blows with the man himself, soundly defeating the mechanical beast. Receiving a call from Chris, Ethan tells him what happened last sentence. Before Ethan can wait for Chris to reunite with him, as the leader of the Hound Wolves warned Ethan not to take on Miranda alone, the dad gets distracted by a baby crying. Finally coming face to face with Ethan, Miranda gloats to him that he's lost his only advantage, Heisenberg, and that Rose is the true form of Evelyn. Or rather, Evelyn was and Rose is Miranda's daughter reborn. Finished with observing the lab rat, Miranda rips out Ethan's heart and kills him, consoling him that his being will be recorded by the megamycete.
I don't know, but I'm saving Rose.
You'd never know, do you? Even when I took Mia's place in your home. Poor Ethan.
Who are you? Where's Rose? Miranda.
Enough. Remember Evelyn and her power over them all? Rose is her successor. No. Rose is Evelyn's true, complete form. She will grow to fully control the masses. And I must have her.
Fuck you, you crazy bitch!
Calm yourself. Rose will be saved. The megamycete catalogs all of us. However, she will be reborn as my daughter.
She's my child, not yours. Where are you? Show yourself!
Why did Rose come to be? Was it because of her parents? And you are truly a special case. But I've learned all I can from you. Your worth as a lab rat has run out.
Miranda! You coward! Come on and face me!
Don't worry. Your death will come quick. You will join the Megamycetes records. I will make sure to sample your blood for later. Once dawn breaks, the ceremony will be complete, and I will become her true mother, bound for eternity in blood.
So on top of it providing Miranda her powers, it's also the moon cell. Who's gonna get that fucking reference? With Ethan's body left to its fate and the Hound Wolves confirming his death, Chris chastises himself for his failure, both past and present, as the situation with the mold as a whole has been going for at least 3 years. Vowing to avenge Ethan, Chris heads out into the village alongside the Hound Wolves to find the Megamycete and stop Miranda. They aren't the only ones with this objective though, as the BSAA make their appearance as well. While both groups deal with resistance, it's only Chris and the Hound Wolves that reach the Megamycete. Planting an N2 explosive on it, Chris winds up finding Miranda's personal lab. Heisenberg's journal was only the tip of the iceberg. Each of the 4 lords has a book about them, detailing their biology and candidacy for being the vessel for Miranda's daughter, Eva. There was a gravestone that had that name in front of the castle, though it didn't give a cause of death. What killed Eva was the Spanish flu, confirming that Miranda was alive during 1918. She was approached by the connections and oversaw their creation of Evelyn, but like with the lords, the girl was deemed a failure by Miranda. While all this is mind-blowing, it pales in comparison to what I'm about to drop next. Miranda rescued and had a working relationship with a young Oswell E. Spencer. The founder of Umbrella was colleagues with Miranda, staying for a time in the village and treated like an actual companion by her. In fact, Oswell not only got the logo for Umbrella from the 4 houses, but the reason he researched into the progenitor virus was because he was inspired by Miranda's experiments with the mold. But while Miranda wanted to bring back one person, Spencer wanted to change humanity. Bollocks. He wanted immortal life and to rule the world. If Chris hasn't been flabbergasted enough, he finds Mia in a holding cell. The real one this time. She too was used in experiments. With Miranda at the ceremony site, Chris goes over to deal with her, but not before telling Mia what happened to Ethan. Ethan's death doesn't hit Mia all that hard, as she has a secret to tell Chris.
I'm headed to the ceremony site.
Wait. You can't leave me here. You promised, damn it. You said that you would keep us safe. We did everything that you asked. We moved over here, everything. And I didn't care. So long as we were together. So you tell me, where is my husband? Where is my daughter?
Ethan is gone. I couldn't save him, but I can save Rose. Come on. It's not safe here after all.
What do you mean he's gone?
He's dead. I'm sorry, Mia, but we have to leave. We have to destroy this village.
No! You're wrong. I tried to keep this a secret, but... you don't understand how special he is.
We won't hear it as we meet back up with Ethan lying in the snow. Wherever he is, his left hand has been restored, so that's good, but he hears Evelyn's laughs, which is bad. Sure enough, the little girl decides to upstage Chris's discoveries with her own bombshell. Ethan died way back at the start of Biohazard. That head stomp delivered by Jack that knocked Ethan out, it did so permanently. Yet, the Mutamycete had infected Ethan's dead body, reviving him. Though her main goal was probably to dissuade him from rescuing Rose, Evelyn ends up accidentally motivating Ethan, who wakes up in the back of Duke's carriage.
You're so dumb.
Evelyn? How are you here?
You're dead.
Dead? I mean, Miranda. She... No. I still have to save Rose.
Wrong! It wasn't Miranda. You were always dead.
What are you saying? I can still...
See? Miranda didn't kill you. You mean you didn't think it was weird? No matter how much you got hurt? Remember. "3 years ago, the Baker house. You were murdered by Jack. You died there 3 years ago."
That's impossible. No way.
You shouldn't even be able to walk around.
Quit messing with my head.
You shouldn't be walking.
Screw you! Then what am I? I did all that. Rose. Mia.
Now do you get it? Your whole body is nothing but mold. You can't ever see your family again.
Family. No. Rose. I have to save my daughter.
You're already dead. Dead.
I will save Rose!
Apparently, Ethan had been having a real bad nightmare, at least that's what the Duke says. Time is running out as it's almost dawn, but Duke, being the total G that he is already riding towards the ceremony grounds so Ethan can stop Miranda. Though voicing his concerns over Ethan's state of health and his inability to return back to the old world, the Duke sends Ethan off. Reconfronting Miranda at the ceremony grounds, Ethan sees that Rose has chosen to be herself, enraging and weakening Miranda.
What? My power is leaving me!
Rose! Miranda!
Interesting. Your body certainly is normal.
Give Rose to me. Now!
Though he tries to take Rose away from her, Chris lending help with a pot shot, Miranda manages to latch onto the child, the father and mother locking horns, with Ethan coming out on top. However, his Mutamycete has reached its limit. Ethan's crumbling away. Giving Rose to Chris so that the two and Mia can flee the village, Ethan detonates the N2 mine, sacrificing himself to incinerate the Megamycete.
Ethan! Ethan! Come on, Ethan. Come on, Ethan, wake up. Oh no.
us.
Ethan, you did it. It's finished.
I think we've finished each other.
Ethan, we gotta move. Keep moving, Ethan. There's a bomb in that thing that'll blow this whole village sky high. Hey, look at me. When I hit this trigger, we can't be anywhere near it. Ah, damn it. Mia's waiting for you. She's alive, you hear me? Alive.
Mia, I'm so sorry. I love you. Keep Rose safe.
Hey. And you tell yourself. Now come on, it's not that much further.
Watch over her. Teach her to be strong. God damn it. Goodbye, Rosemary.
Ethan.
Chris has a bad habit of letting his friends not named Jill Valentine die. On the Hound Wolves VTOL, not only does Chris have to bear bad news again, he's also the recipient of some. The BSAA didn't send human agents. They sent BOWs. Knowing full well the BSAA has gone too far, what with the cover story and now this, Chris charts a course to the organization's European branch. The ending of the wraparound story, Village of Shadows, is then shown. It's a mirror of what took place in the village. Our tale ends with a now grown-up Rose visiting Ethan's grave. She seems to have been drafted into the Hound Wolves because she has developed a set of powers. An agent under Chris's employ mockingly calls her Evelyn because of this, earning a threat from Rose. Though the joke was a bit callous, the agent does mention to the young woman once she's in his SUV that she's exactly like her father, which causes Rose to smile. As the two drive off to Chris's location, they are stopped by an unknown person. Who they are is never revealed. I'm going to preface this by saying that who knows if this game will get DLC. It probably will, and how it will affect the main plot. All I have to go off of is what happens in the main story and what I know about the other games in the series and the lore. With that said, there is a lot to unpack here, unlike with 7 Biohazard. While that game stayed out of the limelight that is the crazy RE universe, this one dives headlong into it, revealing revelations that are connected to key events in the series. Though I could start sifting through the Spencer connection or the growing corruption of the BSAA, there is one man at the center of this story that I want to talk about first, as his journey is not only central to the plot, but it has the greatest omission of all. Ethan Winters is some type of bioweapon. It is indeed this discovery that I feel the most conflicted about, particularly because of where it places the story of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Throughout all of Village, it's vaguely hinted that Ethan isn't completely normal because of what happened in Dulvey. Mia, both real and Miranda disguised, Miranda as the old witch, Miranda herself, Lady Dimitrescu, and Heisenberg drop foreshadowing lines that Ethan Ethan might not be human. Though this is the case, as the Winterses did have residual mold, and in of itself, this is very much like Sherry Birkin in 6, where she has leftover G-Virus giving her increased regenerative abilities. It's not until Miranda embraces her inner Kano on Ethan do we find out from Evelyn in Limbo? A dream? That Ethan died at the start of Biohazard and was brought back to life by the Mutamycete in the Baker property. I have no issue with Ethan being a mold man, see Sherry and Jake from 6, as he was that come the end of 7. He wouldn't have had that fantastic moment with Jack in the hive mind otherwise. What I do take umbrage with is that him dying at the start of 7 throws a lot of what happens in that story for a loop. Retroactively, my praise of 7 focusing on a story about a regular guy rising up to impossible odds to save his wife gets thrown to the wind as Ethan stopped being a normal person as soon as Jack caved his skull in. It's no longer Ethan Winters, systems engineer out of his depth, going through the events of 7. It's Ethan Winters, newly revived mold BOW, going through the hell known as the Baker estate. The disparity between how unprepared Ethan is versus how monstrous and resilient the Bakers and Evelyn are has become smaller due to this enlightenment, which hurts the story of 7 overall. It downplays Ethan's drive to save his wife, which is what I always thought was the reason why he was able to push himself past injuries that could kill a normal man. Determination is a hell of a drug. Resident Evil protagonists, even as nondescript as Ethan is, are known for surviving ludicrous bullshit. In 5, Chris and Sheva fight Wesker in a fucking volcano where convection would kill them immediately. On the injury angle, while Ethans are given special notice, every playable character in the franchise has been slashed, bludgeoned, bit into, etc., and has come out no worse for wear. I don't take him being able to survive punishment as an example that he's got mold. I saw it as just another example of an RE character surviving the impossible. See Leon, Ada, or Parker. Likewise, this puts the role of the healing drink and Ethan's stapled hand into question. Ethan being infected at the start should mean that he didn't need his hand put back together. It would regenerate on its own. See Jack blowing his head off and coming back with a fully formed one to torment Ethan in the span of 5 minutes. Any other wounds he would suffer should regenerate on their own as well, thus theoretically making healing drink pointless, but that isn't the case both in 7 and this game, as he needs it to reattach missing limbs. So does healing drink kickstart the regenerating effect? If so, that would mean Ethan's strain of the mold is different because it doesn't naturally heal him, but that shouldn't be the case as he was infected by the same strain that the Bakers had. Perchance the exceedingly glaring issue this brings up is Ethan's interactions with Evelyn. We know those under the effects of the mold in 7 see the aged woman as a little girl, so why doesn't Ethan throughout the whole adventure? Lucas doesn't because he was given a concoction by the Connections so that he could spy on Evelyn and the family to supply them with information. Ethan didn't have that luxury. Going off of what happens in Daughters and the boat section, we know the effects of the infection are damn near instantaneous, as the Bakers turned into the versions we know them the most as, and Mia survived being drowned. So why wouldn't Ethan not only A, see Evelyn as the little girl, but also B, be under her control? There is a bit of mental resistance when it came to dealing with Evelyn, as both Mia and Zoe, who had knowledge on how this strain of the Mutamycete worked, were able to resist for periods of time, or in the case of Zoe, her entire infection period until her crystallization during End, but again, Ethan was left out of that loop. It also makes the moment in the old house a bit more puzzling. That was the first time Ethan caught a glimpse of Evelyn, as I don't count his watching the VHS tape of Mia in the location, as we are playing from her perspective, thus she would see Evelyn as a little girl since Mia has been infected, but the next time he sees her after the old home, Evelyn's the old woman. Contrasting that, Mia always sees Evelyn as the little girl even after being cured, so what is it? We know it can't be because Ethan was only dosed with a little bit of mold. He was brought back to life with it. If you haven't figured by now, the problem is inconsistency and contradiction. Ethan being a mold man from the start would technically explain why he was able to survive injury after injury, but that would mean his seeing Evelyn as the old woman throughout the story shouldn't be possible. What doesn't help this is that Mia passes this story off to Chris, meaning even if Evelyn was being half truthful, correct about the monster aspect, but gaslighting about the time, that doesn't matter as we have an unbiased party delivering this information. I had a theory that Ethan didn't actually die at the start of 7, Evelyn/Miranda was just fucking with him so he wouldn't even attempt to rescue rescue Rose and let Miranda revive Eva. But damn you, Mia, you blew away that cool idea I had, like Norstein with himself. I'm still going to propose it, as this is an idea that lingered around me after my first and during my second playthrough. Just keep in mind this is going to be a tangent that will only entertain myself, and I would consider it discredited for the time being. To begin, I don't like the idea of trusting Evelyn's words at face value. Why should we? Not only is she the failed reincarnation of Miranda's daughter, she was the previous game's villain and dealt heavily in deception. That's why my theory believes her statements to be half-truthful. She's correct about Ethan being a monster, as we know that the man never took any cure for the mold, but she's lying about his time of death as a way to discourage any attempt to rescue Rose. The best way to gaslight someone is to include a dash of truth in a dish of lies, and what better way to say to someone how pointless their journey was and is by telling them their previous one started with their death. That's a demoralizing statement, whether it's true or not, and it's not like Miranda or Evelyn like telling the truth. They manipulate people, so Ethan's hand becoming moldy during this moment was both an admission of some sort of truth, as Ethan does fall apart by the end of the story, but also an act of manipulation. If one part of the tale is true, surely the rest of it is. Right? I will say that the theory does fall apart in regards to Mia and the first dream that we see in the game, as it's clear that she's trying to mention to Ethan that he's dead, and I'm going to assume this moment takes place before Miranda's abduction of Mia and subsequent mimicry. Though in saying this, we never directly hear from Mia's mouth that Ethan has been dead since 7's beginning. She doesn't get the chance to tell Ethan in the dream, as the ringing phone interrupts the two's conversation, and though assumedly she tells this to Chris, the scene cuts before we hear it so we can have Ethan's conversation with Evelyn. What I'm saying is that we don't have direct confirmation. We have inference and the words of Evelyn and Miranda dictating Ethan's first death being at the start of 7. That does leave it kinda in the air, as trusting Miranda and Evelyn is a non-starter and Mia can't spit her words out in front of us or Ethan, though this proposition is still fast and loose on my part. This theory also takes into account the null space, which isn't a hive mind, as there's no filter to proclaim it as such, so I doubt Ethan is in the Megamycete, meaning it's more than certainly a dream, which would make Evelyn's words even more suspect. Either that or it's limbo, opening up a whole nother can of worms. Though the fate of my theory is probably 6 feet in the ground, a key part that the actuality of the story and my theory share is the emphasis on family. Through her damning statements, Miranda wants to break up the Winterses so that she can revive Eva. This is the other half of the scene with Evelyn, and while I dislike the Ethan was dead since the start of 7 part, this bit I enjoy, solely because it demonstrates the stark contrast between Ethan and Miranda's view on family. While Miranda views her family as nothing but a set of test subjects, which I will get to because, oh boy, all 4 houses have mommy issues, Ethan couldn't care less if his daughter is a monster, his wife's a monster, or if he's a monster. Family is family. Ethan will do anything to protect it, even if it means making sacrifices. There's a neat contrast between Ethan and Miranda. She's a godlike figure who's a true devil, while Ethan is a mold monster who displays all the facets of a Samaritan. Ironically, it's because of Evelyn's statements that Ethan finds the resolve to tackle Miranda again after having his heart ripped out of his body. Of course, I should also include the Bakers as well, as even in their twisted forms, they still fought for and protected each other. Again, another parallel, this time to the 4 houses. While Evelyn in 7 directed the Bakers as a somewhat united unit, Miranda pits the 4 houses against each other not only for her affection, but when it comes to killing Ethan. It's because there is no love there. Miranda is only trying to revive her daughter, which requires her to find test subjects that have affinity with the mold. The Cadeau will only thrive with those who prove their worth, otherwise the person turns into a mindless lichen or worse. The 4 are what amounts to stepping stones, with only Heisenberg recognizing that, thus he rebels against her and the other houses, not wanting to be a slave. If only he was smart enough to realize that Ethan was motivated by real honest love for his daughter, not needless revenge, and ultimately he played right into Miranda's hands. He allowed Ethan to fulfill the ceremony's requirements just so he could use Rose against Miranda. If Heisenberg wasn't self-absorbed, he probably could have gotten Ethan on his side, especially since out of the 4, he knows the danger that Miranda poses. That's what makes Dimitrescu's and Moreau's view on Miranda quite sad. Both are going out of their way to get the attention of their surrogate mother figure to no effect. I don't know which one is worse, though. For Moreau, he's a simple, grotesque idiot who doesn't know what affection is. He fully believes in the delusion that if he kills Ethan or conducts enough experiments, Miranda will love him like a son, which won't happen because of the type of person she is. Her scathing review of him in his notebook is confirmation of that. It speaks volumes that Miranda views Donna as a better vessel for Eva than Moreau. Dimitrescu, on the other hand, wants to be viewed as special by Miranda. Out of the 4 houses, she's the oldest and the most faithful to Miranda even when she doesn't want to be. Whatever her mother says goes for Dimitrescu. Compared to the others, she has the most stable, work with me here as I'm talking about a genetic freak that drinks people's blood, life. Dimitrescu isn't a loner. She has her own family in the form of her 3 daughters as well as whatever business ventures the Dimitrescu name engages in. They make wine, that much we know, so who's to say that the family doesn't have other enterprises? Fetish art? Definitely one of them. Kidding aside, Dimitrescu has it all, but because she doesn't receive special treatment from Miranda, our tall vampiress bends the knee. That leaves Donna as the odd one out. She's more akin to Heisenberg, as Donna doesn't fully follow Miranda's decrees. The puppeteer would much rather make friends with passerbys. In a way, Donna is the only sane one, not testing out the Cadeau on humans, preferring to implant them in her dolls and murder anyone unfortunate to enter her house. Still bad, but hey, it doesn't further Miranda's goals. Granted, it's Donna out of all of them that tries to get Ethan to hate his family the most, revealing Mia's secret thoughts to him as Ethan is solving her puzzles, and then there's Angie's comment on being a better daughter compared to Rose. Donna did lose her whole entire family and suffers from agoraphobia, thus she uses Angie as a mouthpiece. Angie's statements are Donna's statements, bringing up a whole heap of implications. The mother herself, like with the rest of her family, is equally as tragic. If Ethan is the representation of the light side of sacrifice, Miranda would be the dark half. While Ethan is willing to sacrifice himself for others, he did try to rescue the father and daughter to no reward for himself, Miranda is willing to sacrifice others for herself. Her goal to resurrect Eva is a noble one. It's driven by a true love, but in the course of trying to fulfill that goal, Miranda got lost in her own dark machinations. One last parallel, this time to Oswell E. Spencer. For those in the peanut gallery who don't know too much about Resident Evil, Oswell could be considered one of the major antagonists of the franchise because he created Umbrella alongside James Marcus and Edward Ashford so that they could research the progenitor virus. To cut a long story short, the progenitor is the base form of every major virus in the series, from the T virus and all its variations like the T Veronica, Phobos, and Abyss viruses, to the G virus and the TG virus, to the Ouroboros, to the C virus. That's not all though, as the progenitor was the core of Oswell's eugenics experiment. Project W. While he doesn't mention in his letter to Miranda what he's doing with the progenitor, I'm going to assume that the project he's talking about is this one. Why? It's what created Albert Wesker. Full circle right here, as while Miranda and Spencer went their separate ways, both ended up creating a wonder child that would end up betraying them. Wesker, alongside Derek Simmons, effectively destroying Umbrella during the court case by leaking information about what the company was doing. At that point in time, Wesker had left Umbrella to work with the organization, that's their name, under the Hive Host Capture Force and Tricell so that he could achieve complete global saturation with the Ouroboros, before killing Spencer in his estate while Rose selected Ethan to be her parental figure, rejecting the callousness of Miranda. The children's trajectories couldn't be more antithetical. Wesker almost doomed the world while Rose will be trying to save it. Speaking of the world at large, time seems to repeat itself. What do I mean? Looks like the FBC has been reinstated. Oh wait, that's the BSAA. During the Terra Grigia panic, Revelations 1, 2 organizations oversaw the evacuation and destruction of the Ocean City: the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, BSAA, and the Federal Bioterrorism Commission, the FBC. Once again, to keep a long story short, as this is during the BSAA's time as a small op, the FBC was majorly corrupt. Morgan Lansdale, the head of the FBC, orchestrating both the attack on the city and following Queen Zenobia incident leading to the dissolution of the FBC, with any remaining members that weren't moles for the organization / Hive Host Capture Force being folded into the BSAA, which ended up causing a domino effect in the form of then current head of the BSAA, Clive R. O'Brien, resigning so that the organization wouldn't be taken down by the fall of the FBC, which in turn saw the BSAA get support from the United Nations. I'm skipping over a a lot of espionage between the two groups, but there was that as well, the difference being that the BSAA had integrity. Despite their many shortcomings, see all the deaths in Africa, Eastern Europe, or China, the BSAA were always on the straight and narrow, which makes sense seeing as some of the founding members were Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine. That isn't the case anymore, as the organization would much rather feed the public a cover story about Dulvey instead of taking responsibility, you know, what Clive did, and use BOWs as ground troops. Out of all the wrongdoings the BSAA has done, that's the one that scares me the most. Blue Umbrella, despite being made up of former Umbrella staff, knew that sending in humans would paint them as a reformed group. The BSAA are sliding down that slippery slope, as if they're using BOWs, they must be researching into them as well. No wonder Chris formed the Hound Wolf Squad. Shit, guess I'm leaving Chris for last. I mean, it's Chris Boulder Puncher Redfield I'm talking about. Man has a bad habit of thinking what is best for people when it's obvious he doesn't have a clue. I know some people take that moment in the story as a negative, but I fully believe in Chris's character to be secretive about shit to avoid civilian deaths, even if it means drawing ire and said civvies going against his orders. Chris believed when he was right when he wasn't, and it got Ethan killed for the second time. Heads up, there are other moments in the story that I do want to cover, but those will be in the good section, as I wanted to cover the broad strokes here. What can I say? Village is the mutated, in a good way, form of Biohazard. The RE engine once again proves its worth, creating an exaggerated reality that is fun to explore. I think that is something that I didn't cover in the Biohazard video, as I mostly spooged about how much I love the engine, but RE doesn't suffer as much as other lifelike engines because it doesn't go for a one-to-one with reality. That's the reason why Detroit suffered from the uncanny valley. Now there is a tiny smidgen here, as I still think Mia looks a bit off whether she's Miranda or not, but for the majority of the characters, they look great without being too off-putting because the art direction is going for this over-the-top reality. I know most characters in the game aren't human, but look at Chris or Heisenberg, especially Chris, as his model from 7 was the strangest looking one. Going over the art direction, I love the Gothic inspiration and all it entails. Feels great to be back crawling around fancy estates like classic Resident Evil, but we also get that strong hit of 4 and even bits of 7 in many of the locations, particularly the village itself. What I adore the most about this game's presentation is its emphasis on environmental storytelling. The village could have just been like the one from 4, where it serves more as a starting arena to get the player accustomed to the action, but no, Village goes out of its way to show how lived in the village is. There's an actual society living here that sure may be off the grid, but they are no different from, say, you or I. The villagers still celebrate birthdays, have places of worship, all that jazz. By far one of my favorite bits of the environmental storytelling is tied to the character of Miranda. Many of the buildings in the village have at least iconography related to her, whether pictures of her visage or graffiti of the unborn symbol. I mentioned crows earlier in the history and how Miranda is represented by them. In the opening trudge to the village, Ethan passes by a large amount of hanging crows, one spooking him and the player as it isn't dead like the rest of them. Likewise, whenever the player kills crows, they get a tiny bit of money out of it. That is a callback to 4, as you could kill crows to get money and items in that game, but here it is also a non-verbal way of telling the player that crows are bad news. Via the crows, Miranda can watch her whole entire village, and trust me, there are a lot of crows putzing about in the game. Her presence is everywhere, looming down on everyone in the village, whether in the form of her religion that everyone in the village follows or the crows that are flying overhead. That's what makes the introduction of the village and its surrounding areas resonate so much with me. I love the scale of the village, as Ethan can see every location that he will be visiting right at the start of the game, but also hanging on the cliffside overlooking the whole village is a single crow that flies off once Ethan gets near. That crow might as well be Paul Revere warning all the figures in the village to Ethan's presence. Bringing up the religious angle, one of my favorite areas in the game is the lonesome road between the Giant's Chalice and the ceremony grounds, as it carbon dates how exactly old this society has been around. While we do know Miranda has been around since 1918, as that was when the Spanish flu happened, the art style seen on the murals in the lonesome road would date back way into the past, at least around the medieval age. This isn't me saying that she's been alive for that long, but that the 4 houses and the structure of this kingdom has. Miranda, like a mold, took over something that had already existed. I know the stone statues and the house carving do this as well, but those were pointed out to the player and given emphasis. The murals are just bits of the level that are never brought up by anyone. One neat aspect of the presentation is that Village doesn't limit itself to the first person to tell its story. We have traditional cutscenes that leave Ethan's point of view in some animation as well, like with the Village of Shadows storybook.
With rampant rage, Father fought the witch, while Mother's loving touch shattered the dark enchantment. But the witch was strong, and Father yelled, "Save our daughter!" So Mother bore their child to safety as the forest was consumed. Even now, the burnt forest is a grim reminder of Father's sacrifice. To this day, any child who stares too long into the charred wasteland will be haunted by nightmares of getting lost while picking berries.
Sound design wise, while we no longer have the ambient settling of the Baker estate, what it was traded out for was a much more varied soundscape. While that does mean it isn't as consistent, as locations like Dimitrescu's Castle and House Benviento have a much stronger sense of identity compared to the Reservoir or Stronghold, the high points that Village hits with its sound are phenomenal. While I will talk about the baby in the good section, as there is a lot that moment does right, its wails aren't exactly something that leave you easily. Voice direction is another part of the presentation that is great across the board. While I did enjoy Todd solely as Ethan in 7 because of his dry delivery, here he's able to give the man with no face some more range, cementing the character as one of my favorite RE protagonists right next to Leon. Shoutouts though go to Neil Newbon as Heisenberg. I don't know what direction he was given, but I think he was told to have fun with the character, which he absolutely did.
Punching asshole, but you're first.
Heisenberg smacks more as a Devil May Cry character, but me saying that isn't a bad thing. One last piece I want to go over is the music, which isn't bad, but it's definitely more atmospheric. It's not intrusive, but it isn't memorable besides Yearning for Shadows or the Mercenaries track. Resident Evil Village is a first-person survival horror shooter with an emphasis on exploration. Much of what was introduced in 7 has been kept for Village, so instead of me going over Ethan's moveset again, I'll cover what was newly added. The player no longer has to press the F key to open doors, Ethan does so automatically. Doors can still be closed by pressing the F key near them, but they also close automatically. Guard canceling is still a thing, but Village has now introduced shoot canceling. A player can cancel out a weapon's recoil animation by immediately switching to another weapon. Think of Doom Eternal because it is the same way you do it in that game. I don't have footage of me doing it because do I look like a professional at boomer shooters? Pro Waxworks wins, Civvy. You played point and click games before, and it better be the Amiga version, not the DOS version that has god-awful music. Oh, hey you guys. I didn't know you two Chrome Domes were allowed out of the dungeon.
I want to go back to the cloak room. My body mass is still reforming to a stable state. How do they survive it on a regular basis? Oh shit, we're back on?
Anyway. Anyway, just keep a note that this is now a mechanic. Also now a mechanic is counterattacks. Blocking still reduces damage by a hefty degree, but after a successful block, the player can hit the block button again to shove enemies away. This is extremely useful to get enemies off the player, as enemies are now rocking team attacks. While the molded were content with swiping at the player, most of the enemies in Village have grapples that do moderate damage. This isn't the case for every enemy, but I'll get to that a bit later. Being grappled isn't like in previous Resident Evil games, as there's no way to break out. As soon as an enemy grabs Ethan or Chris, he will be taking damage. During the grab period, if another enemy is nearby, they can join in, dealing even more damage, making the counterattack an important move in preventing that. Not every enemy is affected by the counter, however. This is usually determinable by the size of the attacking target. All humanoid-sized enemies can be countered, which puts them into a stumble state where the player can capitalize with a headshot. Monsters bigger than that, though, ignore the counter. A holdover from Biohazard is that enemies will shuck and jive to avoid being hit, but unlike the molded, Village's enemies are much more competent. For starters, they can open doors. Running away from enemies is possible, but it's a lot harder to because of this factor and how fast the enemies move now. Let's just say that mouse aim is optimized for these enemies, unlike controller. There are a total of 5, not counting unique encounters like the giants or bosses, enemy types in the game: Lycans, Moryaika, Samka, Varkalok, and Soldats. The standard 3 are the Lycans, Moryaika, and the Samka. Lycans are the most used enemy type, featuring fast movement speed, average damage and health, and coming in sizable groups. For a basic enemy in a Resident Evil game, it's shocking how aggressive the Lycans can be. They barely sit around, making headshots unreliable except in close range, the worst position to be in when dealing with a Lycan. Though headshots still deal the most damage unless specified otherwise, as the Soldats do have a glowing weak spot, body shots are useful for most enemy types. One headshot or a few body shots can stagger enemies, giving the player breathing room and free range to lay on the damage. Lycans mostly charge the player with a variety of tools or unarmed, though there are some bow and arrow wielding ones later in the game that attack from afar. There is a variant of the Lycan called the Armor Lycan that has metal plating covering its body and face. It has more health, deals considerably greater damage, and has protection against headshots until its headpiece has been removed. This is accomplished either by headshots or explosives. Take note, this only counts the faceplate, as the armor will stay on no matter how many times it's attacked, and striking there deals no damage to this Lycan. Replacing the Lycans in certain areas are the Moryaika. The only real notable thing about them, besides the inability of having their heads blown off by a headshot, is that they are much slower than the Lycans. Drastically slower. They too have a variant called the Hauler that has face armor, but it's flimsier than the armored Lycans. Rounding out the standard enemies is the Samka. These enemies fly around the player before getting in close to do... well, I don't know what their attack is because they have piddly health compared to everything else. To make up for that, the Samka move like multiplayer bots, making them the most annoying enemy in the game. A step above these 3 enemies are the Soldats, which have 4 variants, though the only difference between them is the placement of their weak spot and the amount of armor they have. Soldats don't have grab attacks, preferring to drill right into Ethan, though they can be shot outside of their glowing weak spot as it deals damage regardless, except when hitting armor, and for lesser Soldats, the Eins and the Civvy, puts them into a berserker mode that makes them easier to handle. Attacking their power core is the way to go. However, Soldats are smarter than the other enemies, as they keep their weak spot guarded until either they attack or have their guard broken. The last of the standard enemies are the Varkalok. Being big, hulking werewolves, the Varkalok are the toughest regular enemy as well as the fastest. In standard Resident Evil fashion, save your grenades or magnum ammo for these guys. Combat, unlike 7, is encouraged in this game due to enemies dropping crafting materials, money, or treasure upon death. Before I move on to the shop system, I'll cover crafting. Strewn about the environment and dropped by enemies are crafting materials. Crafting is much like it was in 7, though this time crafting materials no longer take up space in the inventory, and crafting itself no longer has the issue of useless items. Kinda. There's still no reason to make a type of grenade, as flash grenades never felt useful besides rare instances, but with how certain ammo or items are made, there is a better balance of want versus need compared to 7. In saying this, enemies randomly drop crafting materials, as sometimes they drop lay or treasure items, so don't expect to be crafting all the time. Making his shop in the various safe rooms is the Duke. He sells the player weapon attachments, items, modifications, attaché cases, and recipes if they have enough lay. In turn, the player can sell most of the items in their inventory, like ammo, healing drinks, or even weapons and treasure they pick up. Weapons sold to the Duke can be repurchased from him, but at a much higher cost, especially if it has been upgraded. Weapons are divided into 7 categories: knives, handguns, shotguns, sniper rifles, grenade launchers, magnums, and assault rifles. Outside of some categories like the sniper rifle and grenade launcher, each one has a few weapons under it. That's because even though you can upgrade a weapon, a lower tier one will always be weaker than the one above it. The Lemmy is weaker than the 1911, which is weaker than the Scorpion. Some weapons are also situational and could be clogging up the inventory, as even though the Duke does sell increased inventory slots, the maximum size of the attaché case is not big enough to hold every weapon. Level progression in Village is fairly straightforward, though the player is awarded for exploring by finding additional ammo, treasure, new weapons, or weapon attachment parts. Since exploration has been expanded, the map system in Village uses the one from Reimagined 2 and 3, where it highlights rooms with a color. Blue if it has been fully explored, red if not. This doesn't count collectible files or the goats, which are this game's versions of the bobbleheads from 7, but it does for key items and wall treasures. Hanging from certain fixtures are wall treasures that must be shot down to collect. These are like the spinels or velvet blues from 4, and just like in that game, Village has combinable treasure. There's also each house's treasure, which Duke highlights after the player's defeated the first boss. Dying in Village sends the player back to the last autosave, though autosave is generous. Bosses are a bit different this time around, as not all of them are standard Resident Evil fares. One might see the player sneaking around to avoid a disgusting fetus, while another is a vehicle section. Puzzles have become less of an element overall in this game and have been generally replaced with chase segments a la Jack in Baker Mansion 1, Mr. X in the RPD, or Nemesis. Completing the game for the first time unlocks challenges, though they can be fulfilled during the player's first time through the game. Completing challenges awards the player with challenge points, regretfully named CP, for use in the unlocks menu. The menu allows the player to buy character models, concept art, or more interestingly, infinite ammo for a fully customized weapon or new ones. Weapons are also unlocked depending on what difficulty the player beat the game with and perfecting Mercenaries mode. There is no in-game ranking like in other RE games, so have at it with infinite ammo and Village of Shadows difficulty. Difficulty does affect enemy health and damage output, but in saying this, Village is on the easier side. Returning from 4, 5, and 6 is Mercenaries mode, where the player tries to rack up huge combos by killing enemies before time runs out. While the basis is the same, Village's version adds a few different tweaks. Mercenary stages are divided into areas where the player has to kill enough enemies to open up the exit. Before a run begins and in between each area, the player buys and sells items from the shop. Every run will start the player off with the Lemmy handgun, the knife, and a large amount of ammo for the handgun, shotgun, sniper rifle. Once the player has kitted themselves out, they can begin an area. The key playstyle in Mercenaries mode is to kill fast, but not indiscriminately. Killing a monster starts a combo, which will be dropped if the player doesn't kill another in an allotted time period. Echoing the main game, exploration is advised in Mercenaries mode, as the player can find ammo, money, time, and abilities, but not having monsters to kill while exploring will lead to a dropped combo, hurting the player's end score. While time pickups have been standard in Mercenaries since 4, abilities are a new feature for this mode. Hitting an ability totem will give the player a selection of 3 random abilities. They facilitate specific playstyles, such as favoring a weapon type or passively buffing the player. Mercenaries mode doesn't skimp out on the enemies, as it will throw all types of the player alongside mini-bosses. Completing an area takes the player to their ranking screen, where they are awarded points based on combos. The main goal for this score type is to keep a single combo from beginning to end, as combos are dropped after every enemy has been killed in a stage. Time, which is weighted the heaviest of the 3, and lay amount picked up. After each area is completed in a stage, the player is giving a letter ranking for their performance, with B rankings giving the player more starting money across all the stages, A rankings unlocking the next stage, and S rankings unlocking a new ability. A minimum of double S is needed to complete this mode, as getting that on every stage gives the player the lightsaber for use in the main game. While I have yet to do this, I can tell you it is one of the best weapons in the game, because the middle tier knife, Chris's Karambit, can easily down Dimitrescu's daughters. There is a lot I want to cover in this section, so as a heads up, this might be a bit scattershot and I'll probably jump from topic to topic. To at least ground myself, I'll start at the beginning, as I love the Village of Shadows wraparound story on a few different fronts. From a visual standpoint, it's the most visually striking segment out of any Resident Evil game. The series doesn't dabble much with alternate styles, typically staying close to the exaggerated realistic one introduced in 4. The fact that the Village of Shadows is the first thing the game shows you cements how confident Village is with its embracing of mythological elements. While you could argue that the Stairway to the Sun has a basis in myth, as the Nidapaya culture from 5 centered around the flower, it being a natural host of the progenitor, it wasn't as blatant or in your face. It was more set dressing than anything else, as you weren't being forced to come face to face with such an isolated culture like you are in Village. Remember, the Village of Shadows is a popular fairy tale in the region of Europe that the Winters are staying in, hinting that this whole area of Europe, while not encompassed by the village, has seen some sort of cultural osmosis due to the history connected to the province. On the more symbolic front, the story is about sacrifice. While the witch in the story represents Miranda and the little girl Rose as the witch imprisons the little girl, symbolically I view the little girl as Miranda due to how she treats the 4 entities she runs into. When she meets the Bat Lord, the Dark Weaver, the Fish King, and the Iron Steed, the little girl takes something from them without returning anything. Miranda in the story sacrifices the 4 houses with not a care in the world. As she sees it, they are her experiments and she's free to do whatever to them. In short, the little girl taking the items away from the 4 fiends represents Miranda taking away any free will from the houses and leaving them to rot or die. Notice that the 3 of the 4 lords freely give up their items to the little girl, with the Iron Steed being the only one not to do so. It's foreshadowing that Heisenberg, who is represented by the Iron Steed, is not loyal to Miranda. The Steed is also the one to turn on the little girl, and while I admit that this viewing of the story does become a bit cloudy here when the 4 monsters summon the witch, I view that the little girl is 3 characters in the story: Miranda, Eva, and Rose. Much like how Miranda is Mia herself and the old witch, the maiden, the mother, and the crone, the witches of Heke. And who's to say how much of a person Eva is? For all we know, once she's revived, Eva might be another facet of Miranda, not her own person. Look at Evelyn, who was a smaller scale Miranda. At the end of the story, the mother and father find the little girl and the witch. While the father does battle with the witch, an analogy to Ethan sacrificing himself to save Rose and Mia, driving home the contrast between the two types of sacrifice: selfless as the father sacrifices himself to save his family, and selfish as the witch sacrificed her 4 fiends to take form. The mother frees the little girl from the mirror, depicting how it was true love that made Rose choose to be herself instead of becoming Eva. I think that's why Miranda started losing her powers come the end, as while Eva and Evelyn were what amounts to a divergent persona belonging to Miranda, or an alter ego, kinda, if you're a fan of Fate, that had no self-awareness. As again, I don't think Eva would have been her own person, merely a puppet for just a miniature Miranda, and we can see that with Evelyn. Rose was her own person, allowing her to siphon the strength from Miranda. The child essentially used that connection, as I would argue that Mia and Miranda are both Rose's mothers due to the reincarnation of Eva and Evelyn against Miranda. What makes this whole story better, and indeed much of this game, is that you start picking up on the details in subsequent playthroughs. Once you know that Mia in the beginning is Miranda, you start to notice how off she acts. There's the obvious lines like Ethan exclaiming that Mia is taken to this region's culture fairly quickly, but there are also some subtle moments as well. Seeing as I've been focusing on the villains, I'll stay on them, as while I don't think all of them are great, Donna and Angie got the short end of the stick on their personalities, but I do like their designs. This cast of villains is up there, and I'm not talking about height. What I love about Lady Dimitrescu and her daughters, I mean, there's a lot to love, I say as my friends make fun of me with jokes about bugs, is that there's a sense of unity amongst them compared to the other houses. There's no one-upsmanship of Dimitrescu's family like there is with the 4 main houses. They are a cohesive unit. All 4 of them are trying to get Ethan, and I would argue that they are an idealized version of the Bakers from the previous game. It makes sense that Lady D's portion of the game is an expanded Baker House 1 with 4 chases. The icing on the cake, though, is how the daughters start off being maliciously playful. One of them roars at Ethan when she gets the drop on him like she was a wild yet curious being, but then they give into cold, hard terror when Ethan defeats them. Likewise, Dimitrescu dismisses Ethan as a non-threat that her daughters will easily pick apart, but that gets replaced with parental rage as the daughters start dropping like flies. Huh! Dimitrescu's journals might be the best ones in the game, and in saying this, the journals all around do a great bit of world building, as you can piece together from the villagers' ones that all the mishaps that happen to them are more than likely Miranda or one of the houses capturing them for experiments, alongside the cutscenes and the non-verbal storytelling, as they reinforce a few concepts for the lady, particularly her mother wolf instincts. She gets real cross with one of her hand servants due to them opening up a window letting the cold air in, and her begrudging loyalty to Miranda. She's more than willing to follow the orders of Miranda, but that doesn't mean Dimitrescu likes doing it, as per her tossing the vanity across the room after a conversation on the phone, and a line from the journal in her personal quarters detailing that she needs a drink. Oh, and of course, I love all the little winks and nods that Lady D has to figures like Elizabeth Bathory, the confusing castle layout mixed in with the need to drink blood and eat flesh, or Carmilla favoring the same sex over the opposite one. I feel the need to say that about all 4 houses, and while some inspirations are easily identifiable, as Moreau's the dead ringer for the creature from the Black Lagoon, Zat or a deep one, and Heisenberg for Victor Frankenstein or werewolves, he has a base human form that gives way to a much more bestial one, and you do fight him under a concealed full moon as while it's raining during the fight. In the following scene with Chris looking at the growing Megamycete through the sniper rifle, a full moon can be briefly seen illuminating the night. I do believe that there are a few cheeky ones. Mainly with Donna, as while her main influence is poltergeists, I get heavy vibes of the Invisible Man. Most of the time we see her, she's fully covered up in her puppeteer garb, leaving her actual form unidentifiable. This is akin to the bandages that the Invisible Man wore, leaving only an outline of his person but no exact features. Both when they died became visible. She isn't the main threat in her section, being invisible for most of it, letting Angie take center stage. The Invisible Man did have a partner in crime who was completely visible. Donna conducts her experiments with alkaloids, leading to her ability to cause hallucinations, while the Invisible Man conducted his with monocaine, leading to him becoming invisible. And lastly, due to an experiment, Miranda implanting the Cadeau into Donna and the Invisible Man becoming invisible both went insane. There is an extreme appreciation for older horror icons that can be felt through Village's characters while having them be their own spin on these classic movie or book monsters. This isn't even going into the overt references, as Rosemary is one for Rosemary's Baby. Seeing as I've brought up Donna, let's talk about the baby. Before that, who knew that there was going to be this moment of psychological horror in a Resident Evil? No one, because the marketing for this game was superb and that it didn't spoil anything. We were all suckered in by the tall mommy vampire GF only to get sidelined by a gross fetus monster. I know on the replay this section gameplay-wise is one of the slower moments of the game, but nothing will dampen my initial reaction to encountering the fetus. I didn't sit and watch that thing scamper out of the corner down the hall towards me. I immediately turned around and hid in the locker like the little bitch I was. I didn't want to see my new nightmares in gross detail. The framing of that shot, by the way, as well as the atma, is perfect. There's the pronounced, all the lights have been switched off, the cradle in the well room has been destroyed, the side lab's door has locked itself, and the main lab's double doors have been ripped open, and the profound, the bloodstain and umbilical cord leading out of the main lab in the way the fetus glistens in the dark. That to me makes House Benviento the moment where you spot the fetus not because you can see what it looks like, but because of whatever fluid is dripping off of it, decorating its form in the darkness. You know me and my love of hidden horror. It also has a purpose in the plot and isn't a scary monster for the sake of having a scary monster. I wouldn't care either way, but I adore that the fetus is, in my eyes, Ethan's fears of his daughter being a monster. He was told not 2 seconds ago by Duke that his daughter has been cut up and put into jars, thus the fetus being this burbling, fetid, wailing abomination that cries out to him like a child would is the crystallization of his fear of his family not being able to escape Louisiana. That their lives will be forever dictated by that event and that they won't ever be normal ever again. Very Silent Hilly for a Resident Evil game. Skipping over Moreau. Okay, I think his section is the worst in the game and brings nothing to the table. However, his inane rambling and dour demeanor is oddly endearing, and though he is ridiculed for his rather dim wit, he outlasted Dimitrescu and Donna, displaying a notable sharpness when dealing with Ethan. While Dimitrescu put Ethan up on some hooks and left him be, Moreau lulled Ethan into a conversation which bought him time for him to close off the entrance to the reservoir. During his boss fight, Moreau makes sure to protect his weak spot from Ethan's attacks, unlike Dimitrescu. With the next section being the Stronghold, I want to transition over to the gameplay because I think it is the perfect marriage between 7's foundation and 4's ideas. The biggest issue I had with 7 was that the enemies weren't threatening. A closed door left a molded in its tracks. Here, on the other hand, not so much. There is a sense of danger and dread in the first half of Village when dealing with the Lycans, Moriaika, and Samka. 2 of the 3 move erratically, making wasting ammo easy to do, leading to that bad decision loop I gave near the start of this video. Also, a part of that is letting the Lycans or Samka close to you, as it is much easier to dispatch them when they are breathing down your neck, but now they are in range to damage you. Scraping by battles is the norm during a non-New Game Plus playthrough, and crafting leans into that, as each item is useful but there are limited resources. Killing enemies is worthwhile as they drop crafting material and money to make later encounters easier, but can you make it past this current one? This paradigm changes in the second half of Village, as instead of being beaten back by the hordes, you're fighting through them. At the center of this moment is the Stronghold, a gauntlet that lets the player loose, allowing them to flex their arsenal. Does it dip a bit too much into the action? Probably, but I won't deny how fun it is tearing through the Lycan's home like a walking weapons depot. What helps is that the shooting in this game allows you to do so. Ethan's no longer an out-of-his-gourd civilian. He's been trained in firearms handling. I praised the shooting in 7 because it portrayed how unskilled Ethan was, and I do hear the same, but opposite. The Chris moment is an addendum to this, though I dislike that aiming down sights has been removed. The other half of the gameplay is centered around wide-scale exploration, and despite there being points of no return, it's amazing how much of the village you can explore. You're rewarded for doing so with either useful items or sneak peeks into story moments. Finding the hidden antique coin with the growing mutamycete roots is the best example of this. Wrapping this whole entire system around is the Duke. It was always a pleasure returning back to him to either upgrade my weapons, sell some treasure to hear any unique dialogue he had, or have him cook. He's one of the best characters in the game, having no solid reason to help Ethan, but he does so anyway. That little exchange he has with Ethan in the back of the carriage is such a touching moment, as Duke didn't have to recover Ethan's body nor bring him back to the ceremony grounds, yet he did so not for payment, but because he knew Ethan needed to confront Miranda. And any friend of RE4's merchant is a friend of mine. Last bit, the boss battles against Heisenberg and Miranda are my 2 favorite ones in Village. I wasn't expecting a normal boss fight against Heisenberg, as his design stood out the most to me compared to the other characters. He'd fit in more with the likes of Dante or Nero rather than the cast of Resident Evil. For as out there as Wesker was, Guy had super speed and could dodge bullets, his boss fights in 5 were fairly grounded as you can be while fighting in a volcano. Like his design, Heisenberg's boss fight flipped the script, being a vehicle level. There had been a few before in Resident Evil, like the turret segment in 5 against the Nadesu or the Humvee and motorcycle sections in 6, but those always felt tacked on, shallow. There was no build up to them and they felt like needless set pieces. I can at least say 6's were dumb action fun. My main defense for Resident Evil 6 as a whole is I can't bring myself to hate it despite its issues being more glow in the dark than chaos, but the one in 5 is dreadful. The battle with Heisenberg feels like a natural crescendo and its gameplay doesn't deviate from the core of Village like the vehicles in 5 or 6. The tank is an extension of Ethan's moveset, not its own separate system. Heisenberg is also the most talkative of the bosses. All of them have boss banner, flinging out insults like it's going out of style. The major one being him calling Chris a boulder-punching asshole, or in the Japanese release, a gorilla, as that's what 5's Chris was referred to as by the Japanese fanbase. Mother Miranda, meanwhile, has this air of finality, a sentiment I would equate to fighting Wesker in 5. The long road Ethan and the player has traveled is nearing its end, with the last roadblock being Miranda. Though she is definitely a Resident Evil boss, shoot it until it dies, I like how her form switching keeps the player on their toes. Same with the blackout attack. As the finale to Ethan's story, she is a suitable opponent. Speaking of my man, Ethan is still up there for me as a Resident Evil protagonist. His dogged tenacity in the face of peril, even if his being backed up by the mold takes a bit away from his down-to-earth archetype, is enjoyable to watch. Ethan's character growth is handled so well as he learned from the events in Dovey both practically and personally. Who else taught him the importance of family? Ethan saw the hell inflicted onto the Bakers and became resolute that a similar fate didn't befall his family. It's the major major force behind his sacrifice. For his family to be free, Ethan would and did give up his life so they could live theirs. Lastly, the story is unafraid to have fun at Ethan's expense, as the black comedy bits introduced in 7 have been magnified here. There is an honest-to-God spit-take reaction when Ethan has his right arm sliced off by Dimitrescu. It didn't hit him until a full second later that his arm was no longer connected to his body, and then he yelps out in pain and disbelief. That's bloody hilarious.
Like I'd let you get away. You'll be sliced to ribbons before you ever see the child.
This is probably going to be one of the oddest complaints that I've ever made in one of these videos because only a select few of you in the peanut gallery will understand what I'm talking about. I've mentioned that the map now shows if an area still has an item a la Reimagined 2 and 3, which is a positive as it is downright impossible to miss items unless you don't care or are speedrunning. The negative of that lies in the affliction known as OCD or kleptomania. This is what I mean when I say only a select number of the audience will get what I'm saying. There's something that ticks in my brain that forces me to try and collect everything in a location, and if I don't, it grinds my gears to the point of aggravation. Now, most items are easy to find, but listed under collectible trinkets are the hidden treasure items. Resident Evil 4 had this as well, where certain maps had shiny objects on walls and ceilings that could be shot, revealing a treasure item that could be sold. The difference is that Resident Evil 4's map didn't tell you if you got everything in a location. I'm fine with not knowing if I collected all the items in an area if the map doesn't tell me, but when it does, like in Village, my cerebral scourge rears its sickening skull to tell me I missed something. The crystal treasure items are some of the most concealed collectibles in the game, thus leading to moments of me bumbling around in an area to find what I missed. Perhaps the best example of this is the courtyard in the castle. Not only does it have easy to find items, but it also has a few secluded ones. One that I never found because I didn't know where it was. I'm pretty sure my time in the castle could be cut down by 30 minutes if it wasn't for me dicking around looking for jewels. The roof is another spot where trying to look for all the items is a pain. Again, this doesn't count for all the items as any important ones are easy to get to, but those crystals might as well be Waldo in a barbershop quartet convention. Moving away from that, my biggest problem in Village lies in 2 factors: pacing and enemies. While Village is shorter than 4 as that game kicked off the trend of making longer Resident Evil games, as 5 and 6 are probably the longest in the series, it does inherit its pacing issues. Not to the same degree, but I'll give you a rough outline to demonstrate my point. The first area Ethan visits after arriving in the village is a luxurious castle where he must solve puzzles while being chased by 4 figures that are unkillable. Following that, Ethan arrives at a secluded mansion where he must solve puzzles while being chased by a fetus monster that is unkillable. He is also defenseless, and the monster can kill him instantly if the baby grabs Ethan. Leaving the home, Ethan reaches a reservoir where he must solve puzzles while a giant fish monster tries to kill him, and like the baby, Moreau is unkillable and can kill Ethan instantly. The last 2 areas are based heavily in combat, though the stronghold is basically an arena while the factory is a hodgepodge of different elements from the game reworked into different scenarios. Note how in the middle section of the game you are essentially doing the same thing. This is not to undercredit House Benviento, as the imagery of the fetus monster is the scariest moment in Village, probably in the entirety of Resident Evil, but I think its spotlight gets dimmed a bit as it's placed right next to the Moreau section, which is a lesser version of the baby chase. It doesn't help that with the baby you have to actively avoid it, while with Moreau you don't. As long as you don't stand on any submerged platforms as he goes across, he will never get you. For as loud and in your face his fish form is, it's by far the most boring section of the game, which is a shame as I do like the character of Moreau. But doing simple switch puzzles as he flops about being non-threatening does nothing for me. The baby chase is a breather compared to the castle, but one that needed to exist as a come down in the gameplay sense. The castle throws a lot at the player, so doing something simple for a svelte 30 minutes is a-okay. Following Donna with Moreau makes no sense to me, as it's a lull period followed by a lull period. Hurting his section more is that there are no unique counters in the reservoir, it's just more lichens. For as much as I praise this game for making the enemies an actual threat, as the molded might as well not have existed in Biohazard, I dislike the lack of variety, both in terms of enemy roster and encounters. This isn't counting the bosses. Most regular fights in Village will see the player battle either a group of lichens, Moryaika, or Samka with no crossover. Besides the speed differences and the Samka's ability to fly, all do the same thing. The only times the game gets a bit crazy with the groupings is during the factory, and even then you mostly fight soldats with Moryaika interludes, or during the optional bosses as they summon either Moryaika or Samka. The cross-up between the enemies is non-existent, as none support each other. Using my example from way earlier in the video about the zombie and liquor, the two enemies have synergy. Running past the zombie into the room with the liquor will alert it, but going slowly past the zombie might lead to a grab. Even 4, 5, and 6, games that I would argue have the issue of samey enemies, at least have mutating foes, turning a simple fight south in the blink of an eye. Thankfully, this is averted in Mercenaries mode. One last thing, the game does have some issues with frame rate, as during certain moments it chugs to an unbearable degree. Village is a wonderful mixture of Biohazard's gameplay style and 4's design philosophy. It is the best of both those worlds, only having slight issues in its pacing and enemies. Those complaints though are like gnats, as the strong world building, fantastic locations, interesting characters, and visceral gameplay easily overshadows them like Dimitrescu over Ethan. On my list of favorite Resident Evil games, it stands tall next to Biohazard, sharing second place under Reimagined 2, though it does rival that game for me. Though it is on PlayStation 5, I recommend the Steam release solely because of mouse aim. And with that, Resident Evil Village is, well, it isn't finished as per the words of Capcom, but this video on it is. You're probably wondering, what's all this then? Well, I'll tell you. One of my friends told me that an afterword would be a good idea, and I thought, yeah, that would be a good idea. So here we are in the afterword. This segment is a mixture of clearing up anything said during the video as well as a peering behind the projector. So first off, I should have said officially confirmed when talking about the leaks, as Capcom hasn't said anything about some of those games. This is the oddity of leaks, mind you, as it's a lot like playing Russian roulette. Sometimes it's safe to assume leaks are true, as the nature of the Capcom data breach lends this leak a lot of validation and authenticity, seeing as it was directly taken from Capcom, while other times we get the Grinch. What I'm trying to say is be weary of leaks, it's just that in this case Capcom had their plans thrown out into the open. Secondly, Ada was originally going to be in Village, though she was later removed due to conflicting scenarios. I didn't bring that up as it's more a footnote than anything else. Lastly, video-wise, I forgot to mention that you can barricade doors with furniture in specific sections. It's not a fully utilized mechanic. Moving away from the video, I did watch parts of E3 and saw that Gungrave Gore has gotten a publisher for over here in the West. The prophecy might come true after all. The only other presentations I watched were the Capcom one to see if Village would be getting DLC, as Capcom announced ahead of time what they were presenting: Village, Stories, Ace Attorney, Rise, and Street Fighter V, making a lot of people's complaints about the quality of the Capcom presentation kinda moot. Even funnier, they showed the Eternal Struggle video before the stream, which pinpoints just how Capcom was thrown out of whack because of COVID, and the Nintendo one. E3 this year was in an odd position due to COVID, and though some presentations, as I've heard, Take-Two, were giant wastes of time, I don't rate E3s as I mostly care about the games themselves. I popped off seeing Gungrave Gore of all things, and that was day one. Separate from that, I saw the Type Moon presentation about Tsukihime and a new update to Melty Blood. I can finally stop using that joke, or at least I would if Tsukihime was receiving an official translation. Tsukihime will only be released in Japan as of the time being, which sucks, and only the near side routes will be covered. Supposedly the base version of A Piece of Blue Glass Moon will be damn near 40 hours, with revamps to the CL path, which was a lesser version of the Arswed path in the original Tsukihime, and that it will get DLC in the form of the far side routes. For an explanation of this, it's been claimed that Nasu wanted to only release the near side routes to allow every heroine story in Tsukihime to be as dense as detailed as possible. If all the routes were released at once, the sheer volume would be overwhelming. That's funny seeing as the original Tsukihime had 5 routes with multiple endings and is a shorter read than Fate Stay Night, but that's neither here nor there. Hopefully Fate Extra Record won't be landlocked. With Type Moon out of the way, some of the things I want to talk about here are channel related. Those expecting Danganronpa, all 9 of you who I cherish dearly. I can't speak, okay? It's a hard thing for me to talk, okay? It's what happens when you're a blob monster in an abandoned movie theater in the middle of... I don't even know where I am, I'm just in a desert somewhere. Those expecting Danganronpa, all 9 of you who I cherish dearly, those videos won't be made, at least not in the traditional sense. Chalk it up to another victim of script writing. For a time frame, the Danganronpa scripts were written at the tail end of the 2019 scripts. That series is 2020 scripts, but there is a lingering of my 2019 writing, which I've already explained why I hate. I don't have issues with making long videos, though I wish I didn't make one every other video, but it's those scripts. However, I'm not fully abandoning Danganronpa, as some of you know that I do have a Twitch. I want to use my Twitch to not only live stream games that I want to cover in a video, but to play games I don't intend on making videos about. If I'm going to do Danganronpa, it will be through Twitch. Probably on Sundays, as it's the day that I have the most amount of time to do nothing. One last bit of information, there will be no videos in July. It's going to be a busy month for me, as I'm making a trek to the real-life zone called Ohio, and I'm part of a wedding. Thank you for your understanding, and when I come back, expect something to do with robots, arenas, and the flat Earth theory.